o'clock. And can you tell me your name?
My name is Ben Abeles, and I'm from Prague originally.
And when were you born?
June 23, 1925, in Vienna.
But you just said you were from Prague originally.
Well, because my father worked for a company called Stock Cognac, which was a liquor company in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And they were first based in Trieste, and they had branches all over the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And so we moved from Linz to Poland, and we lived in Poland for a while. My mother went to Vienna to have me because she didn't quite trust Polish doctors. And then during the Depression, my father lost his job, and we moved to Czechoslovakia because my father was originally Czech. So that's how this came about, that I was born in Vienna and ended up in Prague in the 30s.
And what were your parents' names?
My father was Arnost, or Ernst, and and my mother was Selma, and she was from Linz, actually. And she came from a family of 7 siblings, and my father from 4. And my father's family, they were horse traders in a village near Prague. And they were kind of half Czech, half German. The Czech Jews, rather the Jews that lived in Bohemia, tended to be more acculturated to German culture. So I grew up in a bilingual home. My mother couldn't speak Czech, and my father spoke Czech fairly well.
And German?
And German, of course, was their natural language.
And you spoke?
I started speaking German, and then German and Polish, because I went to a Polish school. And then after we came to Prague in 1934, I learned Czech, and I immediately forgot my Polish, because Polish and Czech are so close together, and I think children are not able to keep 2 languages that are so close together.
And did you ever speak Yiddish?
No, as a matter of fact, Yiddish was forbidden in our home because my parents were very assimilated, and we looked with great disdain on what we called Ostjuden. And so Yiddish was was considered bad manners.
And did you have other siblings?
I had a sister, Mary, and my name was Fritz, by the way, which shows you to the degree that my parents were trying to assimilate us. And she was 4 years older than me.
And did other people live with you in the house?
No, this was, well, as a matter of fact, now that you mention it, yes, because when we came from Poland to Prague, our financial situation was rather strained. And so at first I remember my mother used to make gloves at home, and then we had a lodger for a while. But then our situation got a little bit better, and we were just the 4 of us. And of course we had a maid, because even the poor people had maids in those days.
Did your father get another job?
No, my father started a business, had a small factory with mustard vinegar and soup tubes. And And so he borrowed the money for that, I believe, from his brother who lived in Paris, from Charles, who later played an important part in my life. We'll get to that later,
Yes.
maybe.
And let me backtrack a little. Was your family at all religious?
Well, not really, because they were trying to, well, not only were they assimilated, but they also not religious. And in fact, I didn't have a bar mitzvah. And on Yom Kippur, when my friends were in shul, I had no one to play with. And I used to hang outside the synagogue waiting for them to come out and play with me. So, no.
But did you know you were Jewish?
Oh, yes. My colleagues at school let me know that, the ones that were not Jewish.
How?
Well, by calling me dirty Jew. And, well, when I first came to Prague, when I went to the elementary school, there was only one Jew there, and the children were from rather working class, proletarian background, and they were quite anti-Semitic. I mean, some of the mothers of the children were selling eggs on the market. They were very poorer people. And I used to get into fights, and one of the boys was also calling me, "You dirty Jew," and I beat him up. And then the other children carried me on their shoulder and proclaimed me the champion of Palestine. So that was my first contact with Palestine. There was more to it later.
Now, when did do you remember starting to hear about things changing? Were your parents aware of what was going on in Germany? Or?
Well, yes, because of course it started in Germany, and then I remember years after the war, I had an aunt, one of the only aunt that survived the war, sister of my mother, Aunt Gretel is her name. She recently died at the age of 93. Was warning my parents, and she told me later, after the war, that my parents didn't say, well, it's not going to come here, and so on. But then it came to Austria, and my mother had several siblings living in Austria, and I went through some correspondence recently, and I read how she was writing to somebody saying that things are getting so difficult, and she was trying to get my sister, Mutz, Mary, her nickname was Mutz, to France, where where my uncle Charles was living, my father's brother, and but I guess nothing came of it. But yes, I mean, one had to be very stupid not to see the writing on the wall.
What kind of things did you see?
Well, the speeches of Hitler that we were listening to, the Nuremberg laws, and then of course the Anschluss of Austria, and then came in the summer of '38 the Munich, with the Sudetenland being taken over.
And do you remember hearing your parents talk about these things, or did you talk about them with your friends?
I don't remember distinctly, but I remember remembering. I mean, yes, the subject was talked about, and my father, I mean, we had listened to the radio a lot, and whenever Hitler was giving a speech, I remember the ranting and raving, and yes, there was talk about this.
And do you remember the German troops crossing into Czechoslovakia?
Yeah, well, that was well, first they took the Sudetenland, and then we had, my father had a sister, Ida, and her husband, and they were in the Sudetenland, so they came to Prague. So that was sort of the first step. All the Jews from the Sudetenland came to Prague, because that still remained independent. It was called Protectorate Mähren Böhmen, Protectorat Mähren Böhmen. And then in March 39, I believe it was the 15th, but I'm not sure, March 39, the German troops moved into Prague. And I remember our apartment was just behind the museum on Václavské náměstí, and the main square of Prague. And I remember seeing the tanks rolling and parking not far from our car, and the German soldiers. And it took 2 days for the traffic was going from on the left side in Prague, as it had in all the Austro-Hungarian Empire. In 2 days it was changed to the right side. So this is my recollection of the invasion of Prague.
Did your relatives from the Sudetenland come to live with your family?
No, but they were living close by. By the way, talking about anti-Semitism in Czechoslovakia, after the Germans took the Sudetenlands, so things started turning rather ugly in the school too. We used to, just before the Munich, we used to start wearing gas masks to school because there was imminent danger of war. And I remember the children at school were beginning to be less friendly to us.
How many Jews were in your school at that time?
Well, I went to high school, and it was the third-year high school at that time, and I was 13. And the classes were, the third class was divided into A and B, and all the Protestants were in one class, and the Catholics and the Jews were in the other class. And we were probably, in our class, out of 30 kids or 40 kids, we were probably 15 Jews. Abeles, yeah, I was always the first, of course. And we used to have religious instruction. We were obliged to have religious instruction. So you could be either a Jew, you had to declare your religion, and you could also be without religion, bez vyznání, konfessionslos. But you had to declare something. So you had to say you are not you have no religion. But we went to a Jewish religion, and we were very disrespectful to our rabbi. And sometimes when he just came into the class, he said, Abeles, Neumann, Oplatka, Otchaste. We're saying Abeles, Neumann, and Oplatka, we were the three close friends. He threw us out of the class even before the class started.
And you said the other children became less, after the Germans came to Prague, the other children became less friendly?
Yes, they became, and they started blaming us Jews for the difficulties. And I don't remember the details, but it's somehow the sense of it comes back to me.
The sense of?
That the children were more hostile to us, the non-Jewish children. But this became much more later on, of course, as things started tightening up, and I was already gone by then.
Now, do you remember when the subject of sending you away, how it first came up?
My parents started talking about the possibility of, I had this uncle in Paris that he would arrange something perhaps. And then we started going to a committee which was on Rubešova, was the name of the street, in Prague, not far from us. And I remember getting a number and then and registering me there with my mother. And then I was, one day, the news came that I had been accepted into a Kindertransport. We of course didn't call it Kindertransport, we called it Dětský transport, which is the same in Czech. And then I remember going on with my parents to Jevany, a resort near Prague, where we spent the weekend, and this was our last weekend together. Oh, no, I now remember another episode before that. I was vacationing with my friend Neumann, who was my best friend and still today is my best friend. And he's a physician in Chicago. And we were embracing each other on the railway station when I was going back to Prague in order to go to England. And so that was my last vacation with my friend. And then I went with my parents still for one weekend, and then we were preparing, then we were packing, and I was going to go. And I remember that I was really looking forward to going tremendously, because it was I consider this to be a great adventure. I was 14, and I didn't see the implications that I might never see my parents again. Or maybe I didn't want to think about it. But I felt that I couldn't show my parents how I was excited about it. And I rather was showing a lot of sadness. And so my father said to me, well, you don't have to go if it's so hard for you. So then I had to try and convince him that, well, it's very hard, but I really would like to go. And then on the night that I was going to depart, I remember the whole family was gathered, my uncle and aunt and cousin who were from the Sudetenland, and we went to the railway station, and I remember my father walking with me on the railway plank. It was Wilsonovo nádraží, the main station in Prague. It was in the evening, and he was telling me that I should never lie and I should clean my teeth, and giving me all kinds of admonitions. And then we embraced with my parents, my sister, her boyfriend, his brother, and I mounted a train. And I don't remember how long we stood there, but then the train started moving, and I still remember my mother sobbing. And it was the last I saw of my parents.
What did they tell you about your adventure?
Well, they were telling me that I was going to go to England, and that I would be, that my guarantor would wait for me there, who was that was she. Wolf was her name, and she was a relative by marriage to my uncle in Paris. And my uncle in Paris had arranged that because in order to be able to go to England, you needed a sponsor. And so this family sponsored me. Wolf, he was a ophthalmologist on Wimpole Street in London, which was a street of doctors. And I mean, the only thing my parents impressed on me was the seriousness of the situation and that I was their hope for the future. And that's to the extent that I heard about it.
Did they tell you that they would join you, or?
Yeah, well, actually, what I did hear was that what they did tell me was, what I knew was that my sister was going to join me, and she was 4 years older, so she couldn't come on a Kindertransport, but she was going to get a job as a domestic in England, and she was going to wait for a visa and join me. But of course that never happened. And about my parents joining, there was less talk about that, or maybe no talk.
And do you know what eventually happened to your parents and your sister?
Well, they all perished in the concentration camp. I mean, not exactly when, and I mean the last correspondence, I mean, we used to correspond with my parents quite frequently until the war broke up, and I've saved all the letters, I still have them. And then we used to correspond through neutral countries, Holland and Hungary and France, but then one by one these neutral countries fell to the Germans, and so finally we were corresponding through the Red Cross, and so we were allowed to write maybe 10 words. So in 10 words I had to put in as much as I could to make them feel that I'm in good shape. And then I used to get back on the other side. And the last one I got was that Mutz und Hans verheiratet. Mutz, my sister, and Hans, her boyfriend, were married. And father had his gallstones operated. And this was a problem he suffered for many years. And I still remember him crying in agony when I was a boy at home. And that was in 41, I think that was in the summer of 41. And then from what I heard later, my sister and her husband then volunteered for resettlement in Poland, because this way they were assured that they could stay together. And my parents, I found the exact records. The Germans were very thorough in this. They were deported to Theresienstadt in February 42, and then they were deported from there to Auschwitz in June 42. And this is information that I found after the war, of course. And also my sister could have come to England because the affidavit had arrived before the war started, but she didn't want to leave her boyfriend, and that's why she stayed.
Let me backtrack a minute. Do you remember the train ride? Were you with people you knew?
No, I knew nobody there, and my recollections are I think that when the train moved out of the station, I realized that I'm on my own. It was really a very incredible feeling. This now that I'm on my own, and I'm just there's nobody else there. It's just for myself. I have to fare for myself. There was one feeling, and then the other I remember is that when we crossed the border into Holland, that the children, myself included, started shouting out of the window, "Pfui Hitler," and so forth. And then I remember in Amsterdam, I don't know if it was Amsterdam, in some town in Holland, some Dutch ladies came on the train and gave us buns and lemonade to drink. And then I remember I'd never seen the sea before in my life, and it was a tremendous thrill. And I remember seeing the sea and then getting on the boat, and I've never been on a boat on the sea, and being on the berth. There was Hoek van Holland, and crossing to Harwich. And then the next morning, everything was so green and so beautiful and prosperous and so different. And we played a game of soccer. And then we took the train to Victoria Station, and I had a label around a tag. I still have the tag.
Do you remember your number?
Well, as a matter of fact, I'm going to check, because I found my name on the list of Czech children of what was his name?
Nicky Winton.
Nicky Winton. I never knew about him. And so I asked Miss Gross
Yeah.
for his address, because I'd heard about him at this meeting here. And I was going to write to him. So she said, well, I have his list here. So I said, because I was going to write to him to find out if my name was on the list. So she said, well, I have the list here, let's go and look. And I was absolutely flabbergasted. The first name was Fritz Abeles, with my number, and it said that the address, it's the West London Synagogue Association, my guarantor, on 3 Seymour Place, and I knew all this, and I seen it there. After 50 years, it's just unbelievable. And that I'm working, my address, Hotel Bailey, which sounds very fancy, but I didn't live there. I worked there in the kitchen. And that I'm a trainee waiter, but that wasn't correct. I was a trainee cook. So you asked me about the number. So I'm going to check whether the number on that tag agrees with that number.
So you arrived at Victoria Station?
So I arrived at Victoria Station, and I was waiting there. And then a very elegant lady came forth when my name was called. And she hugged me. And I couldn't speak to her because she only spoke French and English. And I didn't speak English. And so she took me to her home, and I remember they had a daughter, Audrey, which was a little bit somewhat older than I. It's a very elegant home on, as I said, on Wimpole Street. There were specialists, doctors who lived there. And I remember breakfast, grapefruit and eggs and bacon. It was very, very strange food for me because at home we only had delicious rolls for breakfast. And then the next day they packed me off to school, Taplow Grammar School near Maidenhead in Berkshire. And so I really had very little contact with these people.
And was the school they sent you to, was it a school for refugee children?
No, so I arrived in July, and there was school holidays, and so the only people who were there were refugees, and there were maybe the three of us were there, if I recall correctly. There was one boy from Poland, and then there was one from Austria, and maybe one other. I only remember these 2 or 3. And it was a kind of a inexpensive boarding school for lower middle class boys, boarding school.
And did the 3 of you talk?
Yes, we do. Yeah, actually, one of the boys who was, I helped him to get correspondence. He was in Poland. I think he was Polish, and somehow his parents wrote to send a letter to him through my parents, because they had connection in neutral countries, and so I was sort of a conduit for correspondence. And I still think I have his letters. I still have one of his letters, and I don't know why I kept it, but I have it. But we had some. Yes, we did stick together a bit, but I didn't make any deep friendships with them, these boys. And then, of course, the school started when. I don't actually remember. I remember now that actually the war started before the school started, and they billeted in our school soldiers. But then the school started, and it was a very, very hard experience at school, because they treated us very harshly. The principal, and the food was just terrible, and the children were unfriendly to us, and they were calling us dirty foreigner, and of course also Jew boy, and the children were getting care packages from home because we didn't get enough food. And we used to beg them for food. They had what they called tuck boxes, where they at 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock, they went and took their goodies out to eat. And they wouldn't give us anything. And so I used to make extra money by running errands to what is called the tuck shop. That was a small store outside the school where one could buy candy or cigarettes. And I used to run errands for the boys. And of course it was strictly forbidden to leave the school. And I used to get money for that. But when I got caught, then we were punished severely by the headmaster. We were beaten with a cane. We had to lie on a chair and pull our pants down, and then he used to first he used to cane our hands, and then he used to cane our backside, but to the extent that I had red stripes on it afterwards. I couldn't sit. So and we had to go to church on Sundays, and we had to sing hymns, church hymns, and O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, and so forth and so on. And then also it was winter, and it was so cold because the school was just heated by a small coal stoves, and if you didn't sit close to the stove, it was very, 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 very cold. And then I hated school anyway because I did very poorly in Czechoslovakia. I flunked the last year, and if I hadn't been sent away to England, I would have probably not been able to go back to school anyway. Not because I was a Jew, that came later, but because I flunked. And so I really didn't like school, and I especially didn't like to calculate 10% of 10 pounds, 6 shillings, and threepence.
How did you learn English?
Well, I really learned English, I think it took me about 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks to learn English. I just started talking English almost instantly. I think that I was talented for languages. I had some background already. I spoke Polish first, and then German and Czech. And English isn't so different from German in certain ways, you know. So I studied a little bit before we left. Englisch lernen an Vergnügen, I remember was the name of the book. Learning English with pleasure. And I really picked it up so quickly.
When you were in the boarding school, was there any adult you could talk to? Could you tell your sponsors that you were having a hard?
Well, yeah, that's interesting because my sponsors really didn't. I didn't have much contact with them until the following episode happened. As I told you, there was the British Army billeted a unit there, and one of the soldiers, Basil Drake was his name, befriended me, and he actually lived in Maidenhead. His family lived in Maidenhead, and they were a very simple working class family. And he started taking me there for food, for dinner, and the family actually wanted me to move to them. They wanted to adopt me, so to speak. And so the headmaster contacted my guardian, and my guardian came out at that time to interview these people, and they were very disapproving of them because they were much beneath their class, and they didn't allow me to do that. They also were corresponding. I wrote to my parents and asked them for permission whether I could live with them there, and so my mother wrote to, and I still have that letter because after the war I found some of the correspondence of my parents. It was left with the uncle of my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, who survived the war. And there she says that, Fritz Ben wants to move there, and we really can't advise him, and would you see yourself? They seem to be very good people. And so this was the only other time that I saw them where they did this, and I was very hurt by that because these people were very good to me, and they didn't want to see me afterwards because I think that the Mrs. Wolf must have offended them. Maybe she told them something insensitive, but I don't know what transpired. But so this was the. I really didn't have anyone to talk to, and I hated the headmaster, Mr. Williams. He was a cruel man.
Did you write that to your parents?
No, not at all. No, I didn't. But I did write to them about wanting to leave the school. And my parents, I was rereading the letters before I came here, and there was such a disparity between how they felt and how I felt, what my situation was and how they perceived it. I mean, they were writing to me whether I'm whether somebody who is washing my laundry, and if I'm cleaning my teeth, and if I have regular stool, and if I'm studying, and and how much my studying was important for them, and that their son, an English lord, is going to be an English lord. And they had such expectations of me. And they were treating me in a sense like I was still the spoiled brat that I was at home. And here I was having great difficulties in making it. And I found that really a great burden in some sense. So I was really writing letters home which were fantasies. And I was in a sense protecting my parents. Now I couldn't let them know. And so really in a sense I was kind of carrying two burdens at that time. But I didn't begrudge. I think I was mature enough to understand it at the time, what was going on. And so they were imploring me not to leave the school. But I was so unhappy in that school, and the committee, I think they were quite happy to see me leave the school, because I guess somebody was paying for that. So in April, well, there are long, many more stories about the school, but maybe some other time. So in April of 1940, and I was 14 then, the committee said that I should come to London, and this teacher from the school put me on the train, and I was off to London, and I was by myself. And I was given an address to go to. I believe that at the station I was met by a German refugee couple, and I stayed with them for a few days, and they lived in Kensington, and they took me to a catering agency that was an employment agency, and in fact they were called Cook, that agency, and nothing to do with the travel cook. And they found me a job, and my first job was in, it was called Chelsea Cloisters, and it was in Chelsea, which is a district near King Street. King Street. It's a sort of a artist colony now, I believe. And the job was washing pots. And I remember some of those pots were bigger than I was.
Did you want to be a cook?
Well, this was the only job that I didn't know what I wanted to be. But at that time I didn't know what I wanted to be. Later I had many fantasies of what I wanted to be.
Like?
Oh, I wanted to be a doctor, or I think a doctor. I wanted to be a doctor, a medical doctor. I never made it. And then I had rented a room for 3 shillings a week, and I was washing pots. And then for some reason they fired me, and I don't know whether I wasn't washing the pots properly, but I think I stayed there maybe just for a few weeks. And then I got another job, and this time I climbed in the world, because I became a apprentice cook, and I had a job in Hotel Rubens, which is on Buckingham Palace Road, and it was Hotel Rubens, And and the reason I took that job because a friend of mine from the school, now he comes back, Fatty I used to call him Fatty because he was fat. Oh, and then I remember another boy from the school now, and I don't remember now his name, but it's kind of interesting. Maybe I should say this now as I think of it. I remember I visited his father. He lived on Edward Road. And we were talking about his son, and then the father started molesting me sexually and touching me. And I didn't let him, and I left. And there was a kind of a shock to me because it was the father of a friend of mine. But Fatty, he was working in the sister hotel, Rubens. And so he told me that this job was available, and that's how I got the job. I went to interview. And it was a rather fancy hotel. It was Buckingham Palace Road, which goes right next to the Queen's Palace. And I worked in the kitchen there, and I was a hors d'oeuvre. I was the commis hors d'oeuvre. They had French names then. I was helping make hors d'oeuvres. Very fancy salmon and stuff like that. And I remember one day we spent hours preparing a dish, and I was taking it to the dumb waiter. It's a little hand-pulled elevator where it was going up to the dining room, and I dropped it on the floor. And the chef was chasing me with a knife, and I locked myself in the toilet, and he was saying, "You dirty Jew," in French, "sale juif." And that was the end of that job.
So let me just, at 14, you went to this job interview yourself, you were living in a room by yourself. Did you cook your own meals?
Well, I used to eat at the places I worked. Now, and I don't think I was long out of work.
And who washed your clothes?
Well, that's interesting that you asked that question, because I think what happened was I had a lot of clothes from home still. I mean, my mother really gave me about 100 pairs of socks, and I used to use my socks, and then I put them in the basin, and they used to accumulate in the basin, and I think by the time I was through, I had 50 pairs of socks there, and then I just sort of pulled them out and started using them over again. So I don't think I washed my clothes much. I don't remember my underwear, what happened to that. And then so that's the job. So then I went to look for another job. Where I lived whilst I was looking for another job, I don't remember, because then I lived in the hotels where I worked. But then I got a job at Hotel Bailey, and that's what's mentioned in this list, that I'm living in Hotel Bailey. And there I also got a job as a comic cook.
We just have like 5 more minutes, so
Okay.
I want to find out. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and then
Go
I
ahead,
want
I'm
you
sorry,
to tell
I
me.
was,
No. When did you come to America?
Oh, I came to America in 1956, and actually after I finished my career in the catering business, I joined the Czechoslovak Air Force, and I took some correspondence courses. I also went to school later. Before that, I worked as a waiter at night, and during the day I went to a school, Pittman's College, and preparing myself for matriculation.
Let me just ask you this about the Czechoslovak Air Force. Did you try to be a pilot?
Yeah.
And
Well, they didn't want. They interviewed me and asked me, well, that what was your father? I said he was a businessman. He said, well, why would you want to be a pilot? Jews really don't want to be pilots. I mean, so then I said to them, well, I liked at least let me be a gunner. So they wouldn't even let me be that. So I was a ground mechanic.
I've just been hearing that. So.
And so after the war, I returned to Czechoslovakia, demobilized there, and I was looking for my parents and I didn't find them. And then I found my friend Marcel, and I went to live with him and his parents, and they treated me as a son. And I kind of skipped high school and went directly to university, and I got a degree in physics at the university in Prague. And then in 1949, we all went to Israel, and I worked for the meteorological service there. Actually, my first job was as a waiter. I couldn't get anything. It was very hard so it came in good stead. For a few weeks I worked as a waiter. And then I always made more as a waiter than as a professional. And then I got a job with meteorological service, and then in 1951, I got a job at the Weizmann Institute in Rehovot, and I did my PhD there in physics, and then I came to the United States in 1956.
And where do you live now?
Or in Princeton, New Jersey, and I work for a company called Exxon that make a lot of pollution.
And do you have children?
Yeah, I have 3 children, and in fact I decided to make this interview because I wanted them to have something. And I have a daughter who lives in Boca Raton. She's married and has 2 children, and she educates her children at home. And then I have a daughter in Toronto, and she's a school teacher, teaches 1st and 2nd grade in the inner city. And then I have a son in state of Washington who is studying to be a nurse.
And did you talk to them when they were growing up about your experiences?
I talked to them about it, but yes, I did. Yes.
And what do you think is important to carry on to the next generations?
You mean from this experience? Well, I think that as a result of my childhood in England, I think that my family really had a hard time, and the way it manifested itself. And I think that perhaps what I like them is to understand me better, so that they can understand better the why and how I impacted their life. I think that's basically. I don't think that I like to for them to see that as a model of how they should have their lives, but I think that maybe I like them to understand where I come from and why I am there, where I am, and how it may have affected them.
By why you are the way you are, what do you mean?
Well, why I was the kind of father that I was.
What kind of father?
I think that I was not a good father figure, that I always, I had difficulty in being a father. I was more like a friend rather than a father figure, and I think that confused my children.
Do you think, was that because you lost your father, or?
I don't know. I know one thing, that I never, that I always thought that they should be kind of do things on their own. I wasn't as supportive as I might have been. I thought that they should solve their own problems. And in that sense, I wasn't a supportive parent.
Okay, I would love to talk with you for hours longer, but...
I'm sorry,
No, you're wonderful, and if you have something you feel it's important to include, I urge you to say it now. And
well, the one thing I sort of, which came out of this meeting here, is that the kind of, I think that I felt at the time when I was in England very unworthy, because I was living under such depraved conditions in some sense, and I was so estranged from the milieu of my parents that I always, I felt, how could I ever face them? And I think this certain feeling of not worthiness has stayed with me all my life. And I think this has somehow made it more difficult for my family, the way it manifested itself. I think this was the negative experience that I got out of my growing up in England. And in fact, I remember going back to Czechoslovakia and looking for my parents, and I was really afraid I wouldn't find them. But I also was afraid that if I would find them, how would I face them? And I'd seen them as a child, and now I'm a grown man. And the expectations they would have, the love they would expect of me, and in the meantime, I didn't feel that anymore. And I think it's only now, and I think especially this reunion here has brought me close to my parents again.
thank you.
You're welcome.